Shalom, I'm Glandis, and today I will be reading 1 Samuel chapter 18 through 20 from the Tree of Life version. Now it came to pass, when David had finished speaking to Saul, Jonathan's soul was knit to David's soul, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan cut a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped off the robe that was on him and gave it to David along with his armor, his sword, bow, and belt. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and had success. So Saul set him over the men of war. It was pleasing in the eyes of all the people, as well as in the eyes of Saul's courtiers. Upon their coming back, upon David's return from killing the Philistines, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing in circles to greet King Saul with timbrels, with joy, and with three-stringed instruments. So the women sang one to another as they were dancing, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry. This saying was evil in his eyes, and he commented, They've ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed thousands. Now what more does he lack but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day on. It came about the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, so that he was raving within the palace. While David was playing music with his hands, as he did day by day, Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, thinking, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Now Saul became afraid of David because Adonai was with him, but had departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from his entourage by appointing him as a captain of 1,000. So David went out and came in before the troops. David had success in all his undertakings, since Adonai was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he dreaded him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Then Saul said to David, Here is my older daughter, Merab. I give her to you as a wife. Only continue to be my son of valor and fight Adonai's battles. For Saul thought, My hand needn't be against him. Let the hand of the Philistines be against him. But David replied to Saul, Who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law? But when it was time to give Saul's daughter Merab to David in marriage, she was given as wife to Adriel the Meholathite instead. Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David. When they told Saul the matter pleased him, Saul thought, I will give her to him so that she may become a snare to him, and the hand of the Philistines will be against him. So Saul said to David, You can still become my son-in-law even today with the second one. Then Saul commanded his courtiers, Speak with David privately and say, Behold, the king delights in you, and all his courtiers love you. So now become the king's son-in-law. So Saul's courtiers whispered these words in David's ears. But David said, Is it a light thing to you, becoming the king's son-in-law, considering that I am a poor man and of little account? Saul's courtiers reported back to him what David had said. Then Saul said, Thus you will say to David, The king desires no bridal dowry except 100 foreskin of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. So Saul schemed to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. When his courtiers told David these words, the words seemed right in David's eyes to become the king's son-in-law. Before the days were fulfilled, David had risen, gone with his men, and killed 200 Philistine men. Then David brought their foreskins and gave them in full number to the king to become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. When Saul saw and realized that Adonai was with David and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul grew even more afraid of David. Thus Saul became David's enemy for all days. When the chiefs of the Philistines marched out, as often as they came out, David proved more successful than all of Saul's officers, so that his name became highly esteemed. Now Saul told his son Jonathan and all his courtiers to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan delighted much in David. So Jonathan informed David, saying, "My father Saul is seeking to kill you, so now, please, be on guard in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you will be, and I will speak with my father about you. If I notice anything, I will tell you." So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father, Saul, and said to him, "May the king not sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you, and since his deeds have been very beneficial for you. For he put his life in his hand and killed the Philistine, and Adonai won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David without a cause?" Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, "As Adonai lives, he will not be put to death." So Jonathan called David, and Jonathan told him all these things. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and in his presence as before. Once again, war broke out, and David marched out and fought the Philistines and inflicted a great slaughter on them, and they fled before him. Yet once again, an evil spirit from Adonai came upon Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, as David was playing music with his hand. Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away from Saul's face so that he drove the spear into the wall. That night David fled and got away. Then Saul sent agents to David's house to watch him in order to kill him in the morning. But David's wife Michal warned him, saying, "If you don't escape for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be dead." So Michal lowered David down through the window, and thus he went, fled, and escaped. Then Michal took a household idol, laid it in the bed, put a quilt of goat's hair at the head, and covered it with a cloth. When Saul sent messengers to arrest David, she said, "He's sick." So Saul sent the agents back to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed, so I may put him to death." When the messengers came in, behold, the household idol was in the bed with the quilt of goat's hair as its head. Saul then said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this and let my enemy get away so that he escaped?" Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go or I'll kill you.'" So David fled and escaped, went to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. Saul was told, "Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah." So Saul sent agents to seize David, but they saw a band of prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing and presiding over them. Then the Ruach of God came upon Saul's agents, and they too prophesied. When Saul was told, he sent other agents, and they too prophesied. Then Saul sent a third group of messengers, and they too prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah, and when he arrived at the great cistern in Seku, he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" Someone answered, "Look, they are at Naioth at Ramah." So he proceeded there to Naioth at Ramah, and the Ruach of God came upon him as well, and he prophesied as he kept walking until he arrived to Naioth at Ramah. Then he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. That is why people were saying, "Is Saul too among the prophets?" Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah, came before Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my crime? What is my sin against your father, that he should be seeking my life?" "Never," he said to him. "You will not die. Behold, my father does nothing great or small without disclosing it to me. So why should my father hide this matter from me? It cannot be." Then David swore again, saying, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." So he must have thought, "Let's not let Jonathan know about this, else he will be grieved. But truly, as Adonai lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." So David said to Jonathan, "Look, tomorrow is the new moon, when I am supposed to sit down with the king to eat. Instead, let me go hide myself in the countryside until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked my permission to run to Bethlehem, his town, for it is the annual sacrifice there for the whole family.' If he says thus, very well, then your servant is safe. But if he becomes very angry, then know that he is determined to harm me. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of Adonai with you. But if there is any iniquity in me, then kill me yourself. Why should you bring me to your father?" Jonathan replied, "Far be it from you. For if I know for sure that my father has determined evil to come on you, then wouldn't I tell you about it?" Then David asked Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" Jonathan said to David, "Come, let's go out to the field." So they both went out to the field. Then Jonathan said to David, "By Adonai, God of Israel, I will sound out my father about this time tomorrow or the day after. Look, if it is good toward David, wouldn't I then send word to you and disclose it to you? May Adonai do so to Jonathan, and even worse, should my father intend to do you evil, if I don't disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in shalom. So may Adonai be with you, as he has been with my father. Now if I am still alive, wouldn't you show me the loyal love of Adonai so I wouldn't die? Yet also, don't cut off your loyal love from my household ever, not even when Adonai cuts off all of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan cut a covenant with the house of David. So may Adonai requite David's enemies. Jonathan made David swear again because of the love he had for him, for he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon. You'll be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day you must go down quickly and come to the place where you hid as you did on that day, and remain close to the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. Now look, I will send a lad saying, 'Go find the arrows.' If I specifically say to the lad, 'See, the arrows are on the side of you, get them, then come, for it is safe for you and no danger as Adonai lives.' But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go your way, for Adonai has released you. But as for the matter which I and you have spoken about, behold, Adonai is between me and you forever." So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat a meal. So the king sat on his seat, as usual, the seat by the wall. Jonathan stood up, and Abner sat down by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul said nothing that day, for he thought, "It must be an accident. He must be ceremonially unclean. Yes, that's it. He's unclean." Yet it came to pass on the day following the new moon, the second day, that David's place was still empty. So Saul asked his son Jonathan, "Why didn't Jesse's son come to the meal yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem, as he said. Please let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in town, and my brother has commanded me. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me go, please, to see my brothers. That's why he hasn't come to the king's table." Then Saul's rage blazed against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, don't I know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now send word and bring him to me, for he is a son of death." But Jonathan answered his father Saul, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Then Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him down. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. So Jonathan rose up from the table in fierce anger and did not eat food the second day of the new moon, for he was grieved over David because his father had dishonored him. It came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out to the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad was with him. He said to his lad, "Run, find now the arrows that I'm about to shoot." Now as the lad was running, he shot an arrow past him. When the lad reached the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried out after the lad and said, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then Jonathan called out after the lad, "Quick, hurry, don't stand there." So Jonathan's lad picked up the arrow and came to his master. But the lad knew nothing, only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to his lad and said to him, "Go, take them back to the town." As soon as the lad was gone, David emerged from the south side and fell on his face to the ground and bowed down 3 times. Then they kissed each other and wept together, though David wept more. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in the shalom that we have both sworn to each other in the name of Adonai, saying, May Adonai be between me and you and between my offspring and your offspring forever."